name is Jason Bradley. I work as a tutor at the North Campus for Cape Fear Community College. There may be some of you who know who I am, either by association or you've came in and asked for help, or we may have been classmates. I actually graduated from Cape Fear Community College, and I'm currently a student at ECU studying for IT and, BS IT program, the Bachelor's in Science Industrial Technology, and I'm also simultaneously working on a Master's in Cybersecurity. What I'm doing today, I'm going to be brought in my personal computer. I'm going to show you the components of the computer, how everything functions on it. I'm not going to disconnect the heatsink and the fan from the CPU because I do not have any thermal paste with me to attach it, and I don't want to open up that can of worms. So, usually whenever you're working on something like this, the first thing you want to have is something like this. They got these in mats. These are, this is an electrostatic discharge bracelet. You just put it around your wrist, a little inside of it right there, touches your wrist. The middle part touches your skin, so you've got a healthy ground. Usually you want to make sure it's kind of tight, but as long as it's touching, you're okay. And then this clamps onto the case of your machine, so you've got a healthy ground. But these are the tools I'm going to be using today. A lot of this stuff I might not use because it might not be necessary. But I have a can of compressed blower. Before you use this, and it's a new can, you kind of want to hold it down a little bit to get any kind of dust or moisture or anything that happens to get into the little spout. I've got Q-tips. I've got rubbing alcohol. Usually you want to use 70% and up because it's more alcohol than it is water. Electronics and water just don't get along. I got a rag, just in case. If things do get a little messy, I've brought a personal vac, usually something like this. I'm not going to be using this inside of the machine itself though, simply because it's not an EDS vacuum, an electrostatic discharge vacuum. This is just for cleanup later. So we're going to take this. We're actually going to get this out of the way because I'm not taking any chances. But typically you can purchase specialty vacuums that you can actually use inside of your unit that won't cause anything, just short out. And the tools that I'm going to be using, I've got this handy little tool kit that has all my bits in it. It's got security bits. This extends, it comes out. I can use that one, or I can use something that bends and goes around in case it's something that's a hard to reach area. Pretty neat little stuff. This kit is specifically designed for electronics. It has everything you need. It has the EDS bracelet in here. It's got a little suction cup thing. This stuff here is used for mobile, but we're not going to be using that today. You've got various tweezers. This is mainly used for small chips and stuff like that. This is mainly just mobile stuff because this is a little pry thing that opens up your phones. But you got like rulers. You got more pry things here. This is actually a razor blade in case you need it. These little pry bars that are dual-sided, those actually really come in handy. Let's see, this one I got here looks like it doesn't want to come out. Yep, this is another little pry bar. Mainly stuff like this you can also use to kind of, clean up nasty parts of the computer if it's too dirty. So we're going to go ahead and just close that, get this out the way, because we're probably not going to use any of this. Okay, so first thing we want to do, set all this stuff aside. A lot of times you're going to have a couple screws that are going to be holding your lid down for your computer. So you want to get these guys off first. Make sure you put these in a safe spot, where they're going to belong. A lot of people usually buy divider trays for their computers so they can keep, or for whenever they're taking apart computers so they can keep track of everything. But I've done this enough that I pretty much memorized the screws. So this comes off. We're going to set this aside. I'm going to set it right here. Now that I got the case open, I'm going to want to go ahead before I do anything else is attach this to the case itself so I'm not blowing my board up with electricity or static. Now, if you look inside the case itself, you see that I haven't cleaned it yet, and I intentionally left it kind of dirty so students can actually see just how filthy a board, or rather the inside of a computer gets. Now, mind you, I haven't cleaned this computer probably in about 3 months, so you can imagine just how filthy it can get, after a year of not cleaning it. And if you look right here, this is the PSU. This is the unit with bad. You can see all the dust and everything just caked on here. That probably has a lot to do with it. It didn't get adequate airflow, caused it to work a little harder. Because after all, these guys have fans installed in the back of them right there to kind of keep it cool. So computers, like us, they need oxygen. They don't need oxygen the same way we do. They just need oxygen so it can stay cooler. Because if it overheats, your system will shut itself off. As a best case scenario. Worst case scenario, you can just actually burn your board up and catch on fire. Just a lot of nasty stuff. Okay, so we're gonna turn the board around this way. Now, since we know this is the PSU, we're just gonna leave that, attached and inside. Now these little guys here are actually your RAM. So you push the 2 little sides out. This guy here pops straight up. We'll just go ahead and remove you. We'll set you right there. I'm gonna do it with another one. A lot of motherboards you'll see will usually have 4 slots for RAM, but this one only has 2. This is about a 10-year-old board, and it was one of the cheaper models, so that's the reason why I went with it. Okay, so we got the RAM out. We're gonna go ahead and take out the optical drive next. So we're gonna unscrew it. And we're gonna set the screws aside here. After we have everything unscrewed, typically people unplug them first, and I recommend it, which I should have done, but I'm gonna unplug these guys. Sometimes you're gonna have clips on the top of it. A lot of times you may not. So don't, freak out if you don't see these little guys. So after unplugging them, we're going to go ahead and see if we can't manipulate this thing to come out a little bit. Looks like it's stuck on something. What is it stuck on? Might actually just be a clip somewhere. Okay, well, let's take the front thing off because it might actually be hung up in here somewhere. We'll lift it up a little bit so we can pop that off. We're gonna set that aside as well. You can see the front's a little dusty too. Again, it's been about 3 months. Figure this is a good opportunity. Okay, so this actually comes out this way. The reason it couldn't come out the other way is because the faceplate was catching on the front of the computer. So this is your optical drive. Optical drives are typically DVD players, CD players, and so forth. Anything that uses a disc and uses a laser at the top of it is considered an optical drive. All right, so we'll set that right here next to the RAM. The next thing we're gonna remove, I got some SATA clips here. Again, this one has little clips built into it, prevents it from disconnecting. This is your SATA power. We're gonna disconnect that. Put your hand underneath it so you can support it when you're unscrewing it, because it will fall. Not all cases are built the same, so you really have to take a look inside your case before you start unscrewing things willy-nilly. Make sure you know how gravity is going to react when you start loosening screws on your computer parts. So, Got all three of the, or all four of those, and this slides right out. Now, this sits on a little slide tray, but just to be sure, I held on to it just in case it happened to fall through the slide tray, or if that slide tray just wasn't there. Now you can see a little bit of dust built or collected on the bottom of this guy here, some on the sides. So we're gonna clean that up after we get everything taken out. We'll set that on top of the optical drive for now. Okay. All right, and just for the sake of it, we're gonna go ahead and remove this PSU, which is the power supply unit. You can see that all these screws are pretty much the same, so that's another reason why I didn't bother buying anything to keep my screws separate. A lot of times I'll use a Lego box, different colored little trays, and I write down which tray holds which screw. And this guy slides in, and it should come right out like that. Now you see that it's still attached. It's going to be hooked to the board in two spots. One spot right there for 4-pin, and one spot here. This one's a little tricky to get out, but you got to be a little careful because you don't want to mess anything up. This is a 14-pin, and that should be the only two spots. Make sure you take this thing out slow because you don't want to start pulling on it and damage any of your cabling. So you can see that we just got a bunch of loose cabling at this point. A lot of the bigger components have already been removed. This little guy here goes to the fan. This is for my heat sink, but like I say, I'm not going to remove any of this because I do not have any thermal paste with me, and I don't want to open up that can of worms. Anytime you remove your heat sink off of your processor, you want to clean off any of the old thermal paste you have on it, and you want to replace it with fresh thermal paste. What I will do, however, is remove the fan because I have a lot of dust on top of the heatsink. It sits on top of the processor. And like all other things in a computer, you want it to be free of dust because dust obstructs the airways. You got no air, things are having, or minimal air, things have trouble cooling themselves off. And we all know what happens when things get too hot. I'm sure everybody at some point has had a car overheat. Same applies to a computer. So, this is the fan that sits on top of the heat sink. Under the heat sink is the processor. You can see just how gnarly that looks. Looks really bad. You see all the dust collected in the heat sink that sits on top of the processor. It's pretty gross. I'm not going to remove the processor because there's really no point. I can usually reach everything from here. This is where a vacuum would actually come in handy, but do not have an EDS vacuum. But can you hand me the bag over there for me, please? It's actually one thing I needed from the bag, and it's actually a pair of tweezers. So these guys here are tweezers. These really come in handy when you're removing collections of dust in tight little areas. So, like stuff inside of here, you can see pretty much how it cleans it out. But we don't have time to go through and pick out every little piece of dust. So, I'm just gonna blow it. That's why I have this. You can get this pretty much anywhere. It can be a little expensive, but it's worth its money. So we're gonna start off first with the PSU. You wanna kinda get off as much of the big dust that you can reach. Some of the small dust with a towel. Otherwise, you're gonna dust cloud yourself, and that's never fun. That's also why I'm wearing this, other than the coronavirus. Keeps dust out of your mouth and out of your nose, so you're not sneezing and hacking all day. Okay. You can pretty much see all the dust coming out. Looking cleaner already. But I'm not gonna go to banana sandwich with that because I'm gonna be replacing it. But I do like it to look good, because I will open it up and see how it works. Hard drive. One thing I should note as well, now this is just personal preference. When you're blowing something off, try not to point the nozzle down, otherwise you're going to spit a lot of fluid off out of the can. Even though it's not liquid, it's just liquid air, but don't like to take those chances. So you can see how dirty that is. Even inside there, you still got spots that need to be cleaned off, and that's where Q-tips come in handy. Q-tips clean it right off. This is what you call small detail work. You can kind of see just how gross that is. Now, if you're looking to really make it look good and to really get it off, that's why you have your rubbing alcohol. You wet it just enough, and then you just kind of run it off. Get back in there with it. Actually, it makes it come off a little better. As you can see, the difference between these other blades. But I'm not going to go super in detail with that. I'm only here to show you the components of a computer and the best way to clean them. So, we've gotten all of the stuff that we've taken out nice and clean. What we want to do now, we want to get in here with the board and kind of clean it up a bit. This is where you want to stand your board up. Make sure if you leave your motherboard in that you don't leave anything in the board that can damage the board. Don't take the screws out of your board unless you're going to take your board out. Always use Faraday bags, because Faraday bags prevent electrostatic discharge. All right. Give a little tender, extra loving care to your processor heatsink, because that's what's keeping your board running the most. You can see just how gross this stuff gets. And this is only 3 months worth of dust. Okay, so this is where your tweezers usually come in handy. You're gonna have a little hard to reach areas down here to kind of pull dust bunnies out of, because you don't want to go and spray that with air. So all it's gonna do is get caught up in your board, caught up in your sinuses. It can get pretty nasty pretty quick. It's just one of those things where you want to work harder, or work smarter, not harder. A lot of dust. Now, a lot of people usually work on one side and they blow everything to the other. Some people will remove one of these guys so dust has got a way to escape. But this board is so wide and open that I don't really need to do any of that. If it was a tight board, I could see that, but this one doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Okay. I think my air is frozen. I'm gonna have to wait for it to thaw a bit. It's normal if it happens. It's absolutely normal. Okay, while the air is thawing, we'll take our trusty towel here and kind of brush things off a little bit. And this is usually the first pass. You want to do multiple passes inside of your case. But even if you don't, it's not the end of the world. As long as you get the troublemaker out of the way, which is a lot of the big dust, you should be okay. You just want to be assured that you don't leave anything kind of clogged up. Now, if you actually look down into the heatsink, you'll see that the heatsink is pretty clean. And you remember how it looked before. Make sure that your pin slots are free of dust. These are your main ones. Then you got these guys here. You want to make sure that your RAM slots are clear. Your PCIEs, make sure those are clear. Because a little speck of dust, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a problem until it heats up. And that's where fires come from. Yes, a computer can catch on fire. If you're curious how quickly they can catch on fire, you can YouTube a video of a guy that fills his computer tower up with beans and then plugs it in. Anyway, so yeah, that's the gist of it. I'm just gonna do a quick clean like what I did, and I'm just gonna throw everything back together really fast. So this here I'm not too concerned about. I'll do a little more thorough clean at home. I just wanted to show everybody what it looked like from this end. So you remember this guy plugs in here. So we'll go ahead and plug that puppy back in. These here, they make it, you know, where you can't mess it up. You see these two little risers, little thing. And then on this 4-pin grid here, that it's got this piece of plastic. This allows you to plug it in correctly. Because you got to be very careful how you plug things in on motherboards. They're not hard to destroy. The biggest thing is always making sure you're not carrying any electrostatic in the case. But a lot of people have preferences how they usually screw their fans back on. I like to do it like I do lug nuts on a tire. I go crossways. You don't want to over tighten it. Don't use impact tools. I see some people on YouTube that use them. I've seen people in person do them. You just want to finger tighten these kind of guys. When you feel tension on the screw itself, you stop screwing right about there. These don't have to be Hulk tightened. Don't have to worry about any of that. Now, we'll go ahead and pop the hard drive back in. One thing I forgot to mention, since I've already had this computer unplugged and ready to be cleaned, is that you want to, after you unplug your computer, you want to mash your power button a few times to bleed off any residue power. Computers can hold power in the machine even when it's unplugged. And it doesn't seem like a lot of energy being remaining, but it's enough to shock you. And it hurts a lot. I've been shocked more times than I'm comfortable admitting. Another thing too that I've it's not really a no-no, but it's suggested if you're wearing any kind of rings like I'm wearing, you kind of want to take them off before you start working on anything that has electricity going through it. But I've already stuck a multimeter to my machine and verified there's no power circulating my system. But it's definitely something you do not want to forget doing. Okay, so we got the motherboard, or not the motherboard, the hard drive replaced in here. Well, not replaced, but put back in here. Now, your, let's see, where did my power thing go? Here, there it be. It's this one right here. Okay, so. That one, that's this one here. Okay, so if you look on the board, it'll actually tell you SATA 1, SATA 2, and so forth. It'll tell you what goes to what. So this stuff over here is usually going to go to your hard drives. So this is for your data. And there it is. This is for your power. And again, these are another sort of thing that you can't mess up. Because you can see right here how the notch kind of comes up a bit, and this one doesn't have one. Just like where you connect it to. This has a raised notch, but this side doesn't. So you don't have to worry about plugging it in correctly or in incorrectly. Okay, so we got that plugged in. Let's move these guys aside. We're gonna go ahead and put in our optical drive again. Getting tangled up here. This little ribbon here goes to my power button, which is up here. Unless you're taking everything down to bare metal, you don't have to worry about unplugging that. So, just like how we took it out, we're gonna put it in the same way. This came out by the front. So, we're gonna slide it back in through the front. Taking care not to accidentally knock this guy out the way. Interestingly enough, that's what this clip on the inside's for. Keeps it out of the way. Your case may have it, it may not. So we got that slid back in. Make sure you line your screw holes up okay. It looks like this one only had 2 screws in it, if I remember correctly. And judging by the little circular scratch marks on the middle. Oh, oops. Might help if I had the correct screw, wouldn't it? So there's that one. If you do only put 2 screws in your optical drive, make sure that you do them diagonal from each other. You don't want to put them on 2 top or 2 bottom. It's a preference thing and it's a stability thing. So we got that screwed down. Now these power cables that we moved over, these are what we're going to be replacing. Just like on this one, we also have that little piece. You see how these kind of raise up a little bit? Right there. We're not raised up at these little risers. These 2 little pieces of plastic. It's the same thing like it was on the hard drive. You can't screw it up. Okay, so we've got the optical drive back in, we've got the hard drive back in. We're gonna put the RAM back in. Now this part's very important, although it's self-explanatory. Your wires, make sure they're on the side of the case here, otherwise you're gonna have a hard time stretching them, they get in the way. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you have a bunch of loose wires just hanging out in your case, they obstruct air more than you know. So wire management's a very big thing. Make sure that your plug is actually on the outside. I've seen people accidentally hook it up where their cables are hanging outside the case, and pretty funny actually. I've done it a couple times myself when I was learning. So we're going to this is always a little tricky spot here. Here it goes. Sometimes you got to pick it up a little bit because it doesn't sit flushly on the case. But once you got it where it needs to be, you remount it like so. make sure you do not strip these screws. What I mean by stripping them is putting them in kind of crooked, because a strip screw in a power supply will cause that sucker to rock back and forth like a bad washing machine. And it doesn't exactly sound pretty. Another symptom of a bad PSU is if your computer's on and you got a very loud fan, first thing you think might be the fan inside the board itself. If it's not your PSU fan, chances are it's probably this fan here. It can go one or two ways. You could just have a bad power supply, or it can be that you just need to replace the fan. But typically you don't want to open these guys up and replace anything. If you got anything wrong with your power supply, I just urge you to purchase another power supply. It's not worth opening it up because it's very easy to mess something up in here which can sabotage your board. It's kind of like if you got a bad battery in your car, you're not going to open up a battery in your car to replace a cell and take a chance of burning up your electronics in your vehicle. So your 4-pin goes back here. Your 14 pin goes back here. So we got all that hooked up. Next is RAM. Same thing with your RAM. You're gonna have a little notch here, and you're gonna have a little notch right there. You can't mess it up. It only goes in one way. Make sure your wings are open. Think of it as the motherboard hugging the RAM nice and tight. You line it up. You don't have to close these because they're going to close on their own. You get on both sides of it and you press down and it should click back in. Don't worry about it if you got to put a little bit of strength behind it. They're not going to break. If they do break, then you might need to contact your RAM manufacturer and get a replacement. But so far I haven't seen it happen. Make sure that everything is connected tightly. And that's pretty much the gist of it.